Welcome everyone to Live with Marketers, our award-winning morning talk show or evening, wherever you are in the world, broadcast series exploring industry trends and things that are top of mind for you as marketers with some of the brightest minds in the B2B arena. I'm your host, Alex Rin. I'm a senior content marketing manager at LinkedIn, and I am excited to be broadcasting to you today from sunny Los Angeles. Before we dive into today's content, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that genuinely our thoughts and prayers are with the families and friends of the 21 lives lost in Texas this week. Although thoughts and prayers are not enough, what we need is reasonable gun regulation. I think everyone can agree with that, and hopefully we'll be able to make some changes soon. There's no easy transition from that, but we are going to move into a topic that's important, and that's why we're here today, and that is inclusive marketing. So as we know, consumers are increasingly expecting brands to make a positive impact, not only with their products, but on society. People want to be sure that brands' values match their own, and they want to see those values in action, making tangible, measurable change. Lip service isn't an option, and no, before anyone asks, silence won't work either. So how do brands make inclusive marketing part of their DNA, and how can we make sure that these values arise naturally from our culture? We're going to dig into those and many other questions with our two special guests today, Lola Bakari and Maddie Kulkarni. Welcome, Lola and Maddie.
Thanks, Alex.
Thrilled to have you both. I'd love for you both to introduce yourselves and tell us maybe one thing that's not on your LinkedIn profile, as is tradition here at LinkedIn. So Lola, you are first alphabetically anyway. So let's start with you.
Well, thank you so much for having us, Alex. I am so excited for today's discussion. It's going to be super fun. Everybody out there, for those that I don't know, my name is Lola Bakari. I'm an advisor to CMOs and an inclusive marketing strategist through my company, BCO. Something that the world doesn't know about me, I'm almost embarrassed to admit this. Maybe my Twitter followers know because I tweeted about it yesterday, but I'm a huge Survivor fan. As any of you out there who are as well may know, last night was the finale, and I am very proud to say an awesome Black woman won for only the second time ever. So yeah, that's one of my nerdy things that I don't tend to broadcast, but we're here to be open and honest with you, Alex.
I love that. That's not nerdy at all. That's great. Maddie, over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Maddie Kulkarni. I am the Global Marketing Director for Sustainability and Social Impact at PepsiCo. One thing that you might not know about me that I haven't put on my LinkedIn profile is that I'm a huge chocolate chip cookie fan, and I have perfected a dark chocolate chip walnut cookie recipe. So if you connect with me on LinkedIn, I might share that recipe with you.
Oh my gosh, you should not have told me that, because honestly, I consider myself kind of like a chocolate chip cookie connoisseur. And I have a wedding coming up, so I'm trying not to eat cookies, but after September 10th, 2022, I'm going to hit you up and ask you for some cookies, or at least the recipe.
Okay, for sure.
I'll be waiting for mine to arrive in the mail, Maddie. One thing you may not also know is that Maddie and I are classmates from NYU Stern MBA program. So we have that and PepsiCo in common. That was where I started my marketing career.
Yes, that is great context. I actually didn't know that until Lola introduced me to Maddie. So super special and happy to have you both here. You both bring a wealth of experience, and I'm excited to dive in so you can share your perspectives. So maybe let's start by level setting and defining some terms that we'll use throughout the discussion. So what does social impact marketing / inclusive marketing, if we're using those interchangeably, mean to you, and why is it important? And Maddie, we can kick off with you.
Sure. So social impact marketing to me means expanding our responsibility as marketers. Traditionally, we've had the responsibility to build brand equity and drive sales. With social impact marketing, it's also about creating a positive impact in the world. And I see inclusive marketing as an aspect of social impact marketing. I think of inclusive marketing as being very intentional about our segmentation and our targeting strategies. Typically, marketers will look at which are the largest segments and which are the segments that have the highest potential for growth. When we're talking about being inclusive, it's also about thinking which are those underrepresented segments, which are those minority populations that might benefit from our products. And so with that intentionality, I think that's what inclusive marketing is about.
Absolutely. And speaking of social impact marketing, Maddie wrote the book on it, guys. She wrote the book literally on social impact marketing for Essential Guide for Change Makers. And you'll see she has it in her background. Lola has it too. We all have it. We've all read it.
Huge fan.
Definitely. Oh, the link at the bottom will link you off to the Amazon link to go purchase it for yourself. But we'll be talking about some of the great insights from it today. Okay, just had to give that little plug there.
And Alex, I want to add on one additional piece of context to Maddie's amazing definition, which I swear by. But I also think when we think about inclusive marketing, it's not just about targeting inclusive audiences. It's also about centering the population as it exists, as brands are going to market, and sort of depicting the world in its most sort of accurate form in their creative and also in their strategies, figuring out how to solve societal problems. We're going to look at a lot of examples that talk about this, but it's really embracing the reality that our world itself is multicultural. So we really shouldn't be segmenting multicultural audiences and general market audiences anymore. We should be going to market to all of our consumers with a fully inclusive message, and that represents the world, at large as it is. Absolutely.
Yeah. And we know basically what it is now, or what it means to us. And why is it important? It's important. It's the right thing to do, first of all, but it is important for your business. We have some stats here. So the 2022 Edelman Trust Barometer report said that 58% of people buy or advocate for brands based on their beliefs and values. And U.S. brands are 4 times more likely to gain a consumer's trust than lose it when they take action on a social issue. So we'll talk about what that taking action might look like and the importance of leadership within companies speaking out on social issues rather than staying silent, which I mentioned just a second ago. But first, we're going to roll in some thoughts from our friend Naomi Asraf, who's CMO of Cloud HQ, with her take on a simple way to practice inclusion.
Hi, I'm Naomi Asraf, Chief Marketing Officer here at Cloud HQ, where we focus on free Gmail email productivity apps to help you get more stuff done while you're at work. So when I'm thinking about inclusive marketing, I am including a wide variety of people in my messaging, but I am always tailoring it towards my target market. So let's say your target market might be salespeople, or maybe your target market might be lawyers. Within that variety, within that bucket of people that's your target market, you want to make sure you're including people of different ages, races, religious affiliations, physically challenged people as well, so that they can see that people like them are using your service or product. That's actually called modeling in the marketing world. Now, when you put out messages like that, they'll feel more comfortable actually going ahead and making the purchase with your company. It is a win-win situation for everyone.
Absolutely. And this might be kind of a leading question, but I know that you both have thoughts on it. So modeling is kind of like step one. What is the next step that you can take as a brand? Is there a next step after modeling?
Absolutely. And I know we're going to take a look at an inclusive marketing framework that I created as part of a workshop called Maximize the Movement. I love that definition and the sort of example of modeling, but what I think the opportunity I think the part of the opportunity that it doesn't quite hit on, which is what we really want to focus on today, is that brands aren't really just needing to be focused on resonating with diverse audiences as a sort of segment on their own. The real opportunity is to figure out how you can market to your whole audience by making life better for underserved communities, right? And by doing this, you actually end up having better business results. So we call these max moves in the Maximize the Movement framework, and they have 3 components. So any marketer is always going to be focused on what they're doing, driving revenue. That's how your company stays invested. That's how you earn your job year after year as a marketing leader. You need to make sure that everything you're doing is focused on that bottom line impact. Otherwise, it becomes nice to have, and those nice to have efforts don't tend to get long-term investment. The next piece of it is that you want to make sure you are having a meaningful and measurable social impact that does one or all of these 3 things: creates inclusion, supports diversity, and furthers equity in a way that is measurable over the long term. That's the key to getting past the sort of pitfalls of the performative that we've been talking so much about this year. And then the third element that a marketer really wants to look for is, what is this activity's impact on my reputation? Does it improve my brand's overall health scores? Does it align with our core mission, vision, and positioning as a brand? And by doing that, are we increasing our share of voice, and are we getting that earned media that really creates success for us as a result? And when you check these 3 boxes, you really do find that you have really successful inclusive marketing strategies and activities, some of which we're going to go through today. Starting with, I think the next piece, unless you want to jump in, Maddie, is a great example from Super Bowl. We saw Google Pixel come out with, and we want to actually roll the video and show it to y'all, the audience.
People with darker complexions have always struggled with having good lighting.
Every single yearbook photo of mine has been terribly shot since I was a kid.
I always show up as too dark or shiny. 'Cause if you love me, you love all of me. Everything the light touches, oh, baby, give me light touches. Oh, yes, look me in my eyes, takes over my mind. Don't you be afraid, no, 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 no. And if you love me, you love all of me, or none of me at all.
I love that example so much. It still gives me like goosebumps.
Absolutely love it. And so do you see how that really brings this framework to life? And the piece Maddie talked about in the definition about, that triple bottom line impact. Google is solving a real problem for a segment of their consumers that matters to their, audience of consumers as a whole. Who wants to choose a phone brand that only takes great pictures of a certain segment of society? And this is a real relevant problem to solve that the industry as a whole had not addressed in as holistic a way as we're seeing with real tone technology. And then, of course, marketing it at the top of the funnel across general market. There's
Right.
no reason why this ad only needs to be seen and engaged with by people who are going to necessarily benefit from the particular technology itself.
Right. And actually, Susie, who's listening in, just said that was a great ad for so many reasons. Product feature directly supporting needed customer benefit, which is what content marketing is all about, right? Like a large portion of your segment has an issue with your product and you're solving it. And also on top of that, a lot of people think that like buying decisions, B2B or B2C, are not emotional. They're absolutely emotional. Like, look at the way that we all felt after that video. So who thought that buying a cell phone could be emotional? But like, that's what happens when you do inclusive marketing campaigns.
And imagine how underwhelmed we would have been if the ad was just about, we stand with X community, Black Lives Matter, just sort of the, platitudinal statements that could have been made. No, we're going to solve a problem within our sphere of influence.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, this is an incredibly complex topic, and there's a lot of preconceived notions and a healthy amount of misinformation out there. So let's take a look at some of the conventional wisdom around social responsibility, inclusive marketing with a new segment called Mythbusters. I don't think I necessarily need to explain this one too much. There's myths and then there's truths, aka busters. So let's start out with, I will say a myth, and then you guys can each take on the fact, either reaffirming it's true or saying why you think that it's not true. Number one, inclusive marketing is political. Lola, I'll give you that one. I'll switch off between you two.
Oh, I love this one because it is always all up in our news feeds. We don't want to talk about politics, we hear from some people. My friend and mentor, Derek Walker, said this so eloquently in a recent social media post. If you're not following him, you should be. And it really isn't about politics when you're talking about basic human rights. Equity is about our collective right to exist as who we are and be celebrated as who we are. And there's nothing political about that. If we are living in a civilized society, we need to believe that everyone celebrates that goal. And if they don't, that's fine, but it doesn't mean that it's a political issue. One of the other stats that we love from the Edelman research that you mentioned earlier, Alex, is that 80% of people, just think about this, want brands to solve society's problems. Like, think about that for a second. And it gets even more interesting when you look at another statistic they included right after that, which was that 85% of people want brands to solve their problems. Almost the same amount of people care about this. So it only makes sense to invest in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Not political. It's human decency. Human rights, human decency. Okay, next myth. Inclusive marketing is just paying lip service to the causes your audience cares about. Maddie, what do you think?
That's hard. I think it's very important for brands to be authentic in their messaging. Otherwise, it's clear to consumers when it's not. I like to point to our Doritos Rainbows campaign. It started very sweetly back in 2015 with rainbow colored Doritos. And I think, was that really meaningful at that time? The issue is so deep than just multicolored Doritos or multicolored Oreos when we're talking about LGBTQ rights. But the brand team learns, the organization learns, and every year our campaigns become more and more meaningful. In 2018, we launched a campaign focused on transgender rights, and it was led by a designer in our PepsiCo design team who actually came out to his employees about him being transgender. And that campaign just eloquently showed how internally we celebrated diversity within our organization, and thus the campaign felt authentic. So I think it's very important for brands to live the values that they're championing.
Absolutely. Next one. Cancel culture will take down brands that mean well but get the messaging wrong. Lola, your turn.
I love this one because that term in and of itself, honestly, and this may be something that a lot of folks disagree with, like we love to hear about in the comments, but in my opinion, it is really not about cancel culture. It's about conversation culture. So when a set of consumers, has an issue with the way a brand attempted to advocate for a particular group, all that the brand needs to do is listen and take that feedback in. And from there, what do? We improve. So there's no taking down after getting critiqued. There's only how you choose to respond. And that's completely in the power of those who are receiving that feedback. I think we've seen plenty of examples of folks hearing out, what the, Twitterverse or the LinkedIn newsfeed has to say about what they've done. Walmart this week is an example, and then taking appropriate action.
Yeah, and I think most brands won't be necessarily canceled for trying. Like there's a separate, it's not all black and white. There's some things that happen that aren't necessarily, that aren't tasteful. It's not a brand trying. If you're a brand who's trying, I think there's a certain amount of grace given and area for learning. So
absolutely. And part of that is just about humility, right? Like
Right.
If you
Yeah.
don't need to have it all figured out, then you already are coming from a place of, potentially triggering your audience. But if you're bringing your audience along on your journey of improvement in these areas, people are very receptive to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, a quick reminder that I think I forgot to mention in the beginning, we'll be saving the last 5 to 10 minutes for questions. So I already saw some questions come in. Feel free to keep commenting with your questions or comments throughout. We'll get to as many as we can at the end. All right, last myth is for Maddie. Inclusive marketing is good for our brand reputation, but not really our bottom line.
So inclusive marketing and positive ROI can go hand in hand, and we are going to dig into that deeper as we move on in this conversation. So for sure, there can be both.
Yeah, diversity of thought is profitable, is the headline, but we'll dig in more.
Absolutely.
Okay, so the goal is to make the world a better place. Easy, right? To demonstrate our values to like-minded customers and to keep the revenue coming in. So why is it that, to use Lola's verbiage of max moves, why is it that making these type of max moves seems to be so difficult? What are the obstacles? Is it the buy-in? And we'll start with Lola on that one.
Absolutely, yeah. I think there's a lot of fear around how are people going to react? What if we don't already have it all figured out? There are no companies, when you look at small, medium business, and even at the Fortune 500, that aren't currently in a place of really trying to figure out what it looks like to diversify their leadership teams, to get to that point where you employ, a spectrum of people who represent the population at large. That work is never going to be at a place where, we figured it all out before we can benefit as a society from brands taking advantage of the opportunities to, with their marketing efforts, also try to create positive social impact on the world. But there's a very real, conflict between, well, if I haven't done that, should I be doing this? So that fear does hold people back. We talked about the cancel culture thing. That also, comes to life as something that kind of, makes people a bit trepidatious when moving into this space. And then there is this sort of protectionism around, well, what if everyone doesn't agree? But, what we say to all these things is, if you really believe that you're on the right side of the line, be bold and go forth, because consumers will come along, and the ones who don't, maybe you did need to fire them as your fans.
Yep, absolutely. I'd rather have a smaller group of fans that are completely aligned and dedicated and loyalists rather than like a million that are kind of like feeling moderately lukewarm about me. That's just me personally. I'm not speaking for LinkedIn, I'm speaking for myself. Maddie, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would add everything that Lola mentioned resonates true for me, because that fear of getting it wrong is real. And so the advice I give my marketers is to test. So you might have a point of view that you think a certain action will result in a positive impact, but you need to test that with your target consumers, see how it resonates with them. And not only test with your target consumers, but test with a wide variety of stakeholders. Seek the opinions of thought leaders in that particular space. Reach out to nonprofit leaders and get a variety of perspectives when you are thinking about doing marketing that is intended around a sensitive issue, right? So you don't have to go it alone. And this way you can avoid some of the mistakes that potentially can happen if you do this by yourself.
Absolutely. And if there's an outcome that actually improves, the way that a marginalized group or an underserved group or historically underrepresented group exists and experiences the world or is perceived in the world that you can quantify, then you know that you can defend your actions even if there is critique.
Right. But even if you are, scared for whatever reason, staying silent just isn't an option anymore either. Even when it's a topic that seems too, hot or controversial to touch, like the potential repeal of Roe v. Wade, Now, I mean, that's a big issue with a ton of emotional and historical attachment. But Lola, I know you would say that silence on this topic is a lot more damaging to a brand's reputation than speaking up. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Absolutely, I think so. And, to Maddie's point, especially brands that have come out vocally in support of, gender equality within their organization. So it's one thing if you've decided that your ethos as a brand is one that you actually don't advocate for that sort of equality. Fine, that's your decision. And so staying authentic to that would mean not speaking out. But if you're one of the majority of brands who have come out in support of gender equality, you can't then not support all the things that it means to be a true advocate for women having control over our bodies.
Absolutely. We're going to drive this home with a look into social impact marketing / inclusive marketing in action. Who is getting this right? With one of my favorite segments called Best in the Industry.
We love a best practice.
We love a best practice. We love examples. We love videos. All right, so Lola's going to introduce 2 examples, and then Maddie's going to introduce 2 and just talk about what makes these unique and how they hit the social impact marketing triple play, so to speak. Absolutely. Lola, I will let you take it away with, I believe, MasterCard is first.
Yes, so let's take a look at this spot for MasterCard True Name, and then we'll talk about it.
For transgender people, a secure payment doesn't mean protecting yourself from someone buying sneakers with your card. No, if you're transgender, a secure payment means paying for something without being judged, questioned, disrespected, humiliated, harassed, even assaulted, simply because the name on your card doesn't match how you identify. This is about more than just keeping a card safe. It's about keeping us safe. True Name by MasterCard, the first card that allows you to display your chosen name because that's who you truly are.
And so that is really, if we just go back to what we loved about the Google Pixel example as well, what a brilliant example of a brand solving a real problem for the community that they're trying to advocate for, but in a way that elevates their reputation with the whole of the folks who are using their products. I mean, True Name is something that when I first came across the initiative, I had never really thought about that challenge of sort of not having your chosen name not reflected on your credit card because maybe you haven't gotten a chance to legally make that change, all the red tape that exists. And every time you're making a transaction, you're confronted with that, as the ad said, which can often be a threat to safety, right? Mm-hmm. So by solving that problem, what do? They actually create a new industry standard that we're going to continue to see, credit card companies and banking institutions formalize. And we're seeing that already with True Name. There are a ton of partnerships with, other banking institutions that are now using the initiative to make that process easier. And it's not something that's performative because it's actually real and relevant to that brand as far as what it really is about and what it does and what they can do within their sphere of influence to make life better for the LGBTQ community, and in this case, transgender and non-binary people in particular. So I absolutely love that example. And it really does, if you think about our framework, hit on all 3. Obviously, it grows the business. It does make a real measurable social impact. And what a great impact on MasterCard's reputation.
Yeah, and it's a perfect example also of going a step past modeling. Like, you're not just including transgender people in your commercials, but you're showing how you're going to help them. Like, you're truly dedicated. So,
and you're not just showing it, you're doing it.
yeah, you're doing it. You're showing it. You're doing it. You're talking about it. Yeah. And now everyone else in the industry is racing to catch up to find their own solution because they're realizing that it's important. All right. I'll let you roll on to your next example.
Absolutely. So thank you. And I guess two banking examples from me, but another one that I love is the initiative behind cities to have a home campaign. So let's just take a look at this ad, and then we'll talk more about it.
Your own home. It's more than just a house. It's a kitchen that's been passed down along with the recipes. 3 generations on the wall with room to grow. The rhythm of home. The smells. The sounds. The flow. The feeling of owning a home is not black or white. Citi is working across our business to make home ownership a reality for more Black Americans.
Again, perfect example of problem solving. What is a systemic issue that Citi as an organization, as a brand, as a company is directly involved in? They looked in the mirror and said, what can we do to make life better? And this is part of their overarching campaign. You can Google it and take a look at some of the results that they've published around it, called Action for Racial Equity. And in this particular iteration, we see that they're promising to make homeownership more accessible for the Black community who have systemically been, sort of not treated in the same ways as, our counterparts when it comes to getting mortgages and getting competitive rates. And, there's so much research to that effect. So I love this one again, as it's not just lip service. It's about what can we do that is relevant to us, that actually can grow our business and win customers. Nothing wrong with that, but solves a systemic problem.
Yeah. And I love it because it's also a good reminder that we're not just here to cater to the majority of our audience, but look at who's not our audience and why are they not our audience? And then trying to solve that as well. If there's not as many Black folks that are using Citi to buy homes, then what can we do to help? So yes. Also,
sorry, Alex, just one more point on this.
Yeah.
Think about that. So the tough part for folks to wrap their heads around is the reality that ad is not just going to acquire Black customers. The world we live in today, that ad is going to resonate with a wide spectrum of consumers. And it doesn't just need to run to a multicultural segment in this new world order that we're in. And the brands that are recognizing that reality more quickly than others are the category leaders of tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. Okay, Maddie, I will throw it over to you for your examples.
I love those 2 examples. Okay, the first one I wanted to start with was Netflix's Bridgerton. Okay, so I don't know how many of you have also partaken in this guilty pleasure of mine of binge watching Bridgerton. But in season 1 of this period drama, I think there was some 10, 12 episodes. But producer Shonda Rhimes creates this beautiful world, this colorful world full of diversity back in the 1800s of London, England, where we got to see her vision of what society could be. That kind of diversity we know did not exist during that time period, but we saw a Black queen in London. We saw Chinese, we saw Indian, we saw so many different races in what she presented on TV. Came back for season 2. And there's a fun little clip that I pulled from season 2. If we could roll that.
Didi, 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 Didi. You are not to go near that man. Do you understand?
Okay. So in season 2, we were introduced to 2 Indian female leads, romantic leads. And growing up in America, I had never seen that on TV. So it was shocking to me. And I'm here on group texts with my girlfriends. I'm like, have you seen season 2 yet? And every time the little sister said Didi, we just we went, aw, because that's what we call our big sisters. And what I loved about what Shonda created and presented to us was a celebration of the culture. these weren't characters that they found diverse casting for, right? These were characters who had storylines created around them that celebrated the culture. So during the wedding scenes, we saw the haldi ceremony that we typically don't see. We see the big Indian wedding, but we don't see all the rituals beforehand. We see the big sister put oil in the little sister's hair. That's part of our culture. And so these little things just created such a beautiful depiction of what cultural diversity in the world could be. Sometimes as marketers, we're asked to reflect society, reflect what we see. But Shonda took it to the next level. She was like, this is what could be. And it was quite beautiful. So that was my first example. I don't know. What do you think?
That's a good one, Maddie. We loved it. That's the thing. We all loved it. It wasn't just for those of us who got that benefit of seeing ourselves depicted in that way for the first time. It was for everyone. It's the perfect example.
Yeah, and people in the comments are also loving it. Love Bridgerton. She did a wonderful job at diversifying classes of people, not just including them. Ayana said, I love season 2 and how they incorporated 2 Indian leads. It was so amazing to see and watch. So.
And I will say I would love to see more darker skinned Black women with speaking roles in Bridgerton. If anyone over at Netflix is but other than that, perfect.
I'll send that message straight to the top. I know people.
Alex is connected. Okay, so for the next example, I wanted to pull something from P&G. So this is a commercial that they're running for Asian American Pacific Islander Month. So let's take a look at that one.
Youngju, you are perfect.
Youngju.
But I know it won't always feel like that. Your name will make you feel different. Like they don't want to get to know you. But I promise there will be those who try.
Hey, Youngju.
The MVP award goes to Yeongjo.
It's actually
Youngju.
You remember what Youngju means? It means strong and resilient. Because I know you will be. What a beautiful name. Can you teach me how to say it?
Okay, well, this is embarrassing, but I'm crying over here. So I hadn't seen that one before, and I absolutely loved it.
I'm trying to keep it together. But this one also resonated with me because I have a name that's difficult to pronounce, and I saw myself in that little girl, and I see that in a lot of my Asian friends experiencing that. My first name is Madhura, and now I go by Maddie. It is easier to pronounce for most people, but whenever I meet someone who can pronounce it, I love hearing my name. And I loved how P&G tapped into this cultural insight, connected with the Asian community, and offered a solution for everybody to help make Asian Americans feel more included in society, just by simply asking, how do I pronounce your name? And so I thought that was a lovely way of celebrating the culture, having a teaching moment, driving equity for their brands. So Vicks and Pampers, P&G, proud sponsor of moms, is stuck in my head ever since the Olympics campaign we saw many years ago, right? Yeah. And so I feel like they're continuing on that. So that's another one I loved.
Yeah, P&G is a great example. They always do such a great job. I had seen that one before, and I love it.
And I just want to add on that one too. I honestly think the impact goes beyond just the Asian American audience that was depicted. As Maddie touched on, everybody else is being taught what is the right thing to do when you can't pronounce someone's name. And myself as a first generation Nigerian, my full name is Titi Lola. I remember, in those elementary school days when the teacher's going down the roll and they get to my name and just sort of like, ooh, I don't know how to pronounce this one. And it's this awkward thing. That solution works across, any ethnicity where names are sort of not the typical American names. And that teachable moment is so just broadly applicable to so many cases. What makes it so special.
Yeah. Speaking of names being misspoken, I believe that I said your last name wrong, Lola. I think I said Bakari, and you said it as, what is the right way to say
it?
Bakari. Okay, There we go. I have a teaching moment too. Bakari. Growing up, it was always Alexandra Rhine. Like, so I should know that you should ask how to.
And I've been pronouncing it Rin in my head, so there we go. Thank you.
You were saying Rin all along.
In my head. I mean, I don't think I said it out loud, but yeah, that was what I thought it was. So you just taught me.
Well, no, people think Rhine. It was, you were right. Your head was right.
Thanks, Alex.
Anyway, I love those examples. I hope that the audience got a lot out of them. We're going to switch it up to talk a little bit about PepsiCo's journey in this space. I'd love to hear, Maddie, how you got to where you are now, your experience with Pepsi. And then I guess I didn't know this, but Lola, you also worked there too. So if you have anything to add to that, I'd love to hear from both of you.
Sure. Well, I've been at PepsiCo 12 years now. Last several years have been in the sustainability and social impact space. And what we're trying to do at PepsiCo, we have a wide portfolio of brands that include snacks like Lay's and Doritos and Cheetos, to Quaker Oats, to Gatorade, to Aquafina. So we have a broad portfolio of food and beverage brands. But we're trying to think about how every brand can make a positive impact in the world. And we're thinking through, like, what are those people initiatives or the planet initiatives each brand can take up based on what the world needs, what our consumers care about, and where we think we can make material impact in the category. And then when it comes to inclusion, we're looking at the internal diversity of our marketing teams. We're looking at spend with diverse suppliers. We're looking at representation in our ads. So in that way, we're trying to be very intentional in the impact each brand makes. So like to Lola's point, it isn't performatory. It's not performance marketing. It's very intentional about changing our food system for the better, but doing it in a way that's inclusive as well.
And I won't add anything to that masterful explanation. My PepsiCo years were many years ago as a baby marketer on the Gatorade brand. But I will say that just watching how that marketing team really, took so much care to consider these issues, especially being in the athletic space with a lot of the initiatives. I learned a lot from the senior folks on that team. That definitely shaped my perspectives as they are today.
A baby marketer. Is that what you called yourself? You were a baby marketer.
A long time ago.
I will forever be a baby marketer. Stuff's always changing. All right. So we saw some examples. We know that if brands can do it right, it benefits everyone. We talked a little bit about the obstacles, but for folks that are on the line, can we just talk a little bit about how you go about getting buy-in with like execs? Whoever wants to start. Maddie, you can start if you'd like.
I think the research shows it, right? So the research, we can point to Edelman's Trust Barometer report. We can point to the reports Porter Novelli does. Conspiracy, if you are looking for data that supports how purpose can drive growth, email me or Lola. Our hard drives are filled with studies that show this. So the business case to do it is there. It's now, how do we do it authentically, in the right tone of voice, in the right brand personality, right? So that's what we're working on now. And I think the sell-in comes when we can show that our marketing is resonating with consumers. And that happens when you test. Like I said before, this is my mantra at PepsiCo with my marketers. Be sure we are testing not only with our consumers, but with a wide variety of stakeholders.
Absolutely. Yep, go ahead.
I love it. And the only thing I would add there is that what is the real risk? So I encourage marketers to reframe the risk and think about the risk of standing still and the risk of sort of looking at things in terms of the status quo, And when you really flip it that way, people start to see this as no different than any other marketing exercise. You're always looking for the next things you can do to drive, larger growth in the next year and being first to market with those things. So it really doesn't pay to be slow to innovate in the inclusive marketing space. And the rewards are there. I think Fenty is another great example of a brand that completely shifted the category in a way that no other of their competitors sort of thought needed to happen. But once they did, boy, did they steal share from the other makeup brands who didn't have the wide array of assortment that Fenty does.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the risk of doing nothing definitely outweighs the risk of saying something. I mean, if you do nothing, you're going to be left behind. You're going to be canceled. Like, I think we should actually reframe cancel culture as like, if you're not going to change anything about yourself, you're going to be canceled, because you can't just go about doing the same things when society's changing. So maybe that's the way.
If you're going to be irrelevant, which is even worse than being canceled. I mean, at least there's emotion related to your brand if folks are talking about it, but you get to a point where you're just absolutely obsolete if you don't.
Totally. People are going to stop talking about you altogether, which you're right is worse than being like controversial, because if you're controversial, people care, like you said. Yeah. Okay, cool. Oh, Ayana. Oh, we have a lot of love for Fenty. Fenty created their own blueprint. Agreed 100 times with that Fenty comment. Fenty. Love it. Okay. Okay, so I want to get another opinion from one of our friendlies. So we're going to wrap it up. Let's talk about how our audience can make some max moves of their own. And before we do, here are a few quick tips from our marketer, our friend, Rakia Reynolds.
Awesome.
Hi, I'm Rakia Reynolds, founder and executive officer of Sky Blue Media. We are a multimedia, multicultural communications agency. And when asked how to create an inclusive marketing campaign, here are a few things we want you to consider. One, always know that not every cultural holiday needs to be commodified. Two, it's always extremely important to have people with lived experiences at the table when you're making decisions about any campaign that impacts a particular audience. Lastly, always think about the lexicon and language that you're using for campaigns. Have you considered the historical relevance, the etymology, and the history or the origin of some of the words that you'd like to use in your campaign?
Love that. Absolutely. And Rakia makes such excellent points. A yes and to one of them is, because I've seen a lot of examples of this year. Let's say you've gotten to the point where you have folks representing the lived experience of the group you're trying to advocate for at the table. Don't assume that if that person or people aren't vocal about things that may not have resonated with them, that you're in the clear. Because we still have so many challenges within organizations of people feeling like they have enough of a sense of belonging to voice those opinions that might dissent from, that at large in the room. So everybody is responsible for making sure that these efforts hit the right tone. And it's not just on the people who represent that lived experience, who absolutely need to be in the room, but it's not just on them to be on the right side of the line.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Okay, so now back to Lola and Maddie. What is your first step for folks who are ready to make some max moves of their own? So kind of some final bits of advice and actionable steps. And Maddie, we will start with you.
My number one piece of advice is start with your own house.
Yes.
Be sure you know your supply chain, your systems, who's in your organization backwards and forwards, and understand what are those equity issues in your category.
Yes.
Because of your product and your brand, what are those impacts you can make in the world? So start at home would be my biggest piece of advice.
I love that. And I mean, I'll just yes and that, Maddie, and say it's about keeping it real. Like, that's when you say start at home, what I hear is come from a place of truth. And that's what this is all about. It's not that different than any other marketing strategic planning approach to figuring out what you're going to do next. It's about what's your opportunity from a growth standpoint. We talked about that revenue piece. It's about what can I do that's actually going to make a meaningful difference? And then it's about figuring out how I do that in a way that's relevant to my brand. And if you do all of those things, you're going to be on the right side of the line. You know, I think, Alex, you talked a lot about buy-in. So I want to make sure we hit on, you know, some actionable advice around that as well. But don't be afraid if you're working on a team and you feel some sort of hesitance from others to go into this space, talk about that FOMO piece. Well, okay, if we're not the ones who do this, how are we going to feel next year when our competitor has done it, right? Mm-hmm. You know, and frame those fears in a positive way. Like help people work through their fears of getting into a space where there might be quote unquote controversy, with examples of those, like we saw the celebration around Fenty in the chat, who have done it well. I love to bring in benchmarks outside of categories for teams that are considering you know, initiatives in this space so that they can really see the potential without feeling threatened.
Yeah, I think also part of that buy-in conversation is not only making the case through research, et cetera, but what I'm sure executives are going to want to know, like what kind of tools are we going to need to invest in, or what tools, how will we measure it, essentially? So do you guys have any thoughts on that before we wrap?
I mean, Maddie, you jump in, but one, and this is it might sound a little sharp, but I want to challenge people from thinking about this sort of activity as something that needs to be measured more rigorously than everything else you do as a marketer. So the tools are the same. Did it work? Were my OKRs sort of achieved? Were my KPIs achieved? Did the things I set out to do actually happen? There's no magical different thing that we need to be measuring when it comes to, did I succeed with my inclusive marketing, as long as we set the right goals at the outset. And some of the time, I think those discussions about measurement are a distraction to keep us in a place of status quo. Yeah. If you're willing to explore metaverse without having this perfect, you know, let me get my attribution figured out sort of algorithm that you can throw it into and say, we absolutely should do this. If you're willing to try other things, this should be no different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
Well said, Lola.
Well said. I love that this episode was had a lot of strong, intelligent women featured. And speaking of, is that RGB in your background, Maddie?
Mm-hmm. Little RGB bobblehead over here.
I was like looking at, I was like, is that RGB? Does she have arms? No, she doesn't have arms.
Yeah, she does.
Oh, she does? Okay, okay. Oh.
My little inspiration.
Love it.
Love it. All right, let's move into Q&A. We have a lot of questions just waiting for us.
Bring it on.
So let's see. What's the, we talked about this a little bit, but what's the best way for a brand to deal with inclusive marketing failure? How can they apologize and move on gracefully?
Maddie, you want to take that one first?
Sure. This happens. We've made mistakes at PepsiCo too, and it hurts. It really hurts when we get it wrong. And I think the best thing to do is apologize, be sincere, and try to do better next time, and make that commitment to do better next time. There's no point in avoiding or deflecting or finger pointing. We made a mistake. We will do better. And then you do better.
Absolutely.
Better next time.
Yeah, just owning it. I think putting aside your ego or sensitivities and just owning it is probably the best. I mean, yeah, it's the same in like a one-on-one relationship with someone. You make a mistake, you own it, you move on, you try to do better. So, yeah.
And that speed to defensiveness is something that folks really need to examine. Why in this particular space does that get triggered so easily? And that's a whole nother discussion we can have. But I absolutely agree. It's like any other apology and any other process of listening to truly understand.
Yeah, and I think part of the defensiveness might be because folks just don't want to own their kind of like their unconscious biases that they may have. You know, they either don't want to own it or they're not aware of it. So it comes across as a shock to them when they thought they were trying to do something right? So that might be part of it.
Remember that scene in Cruel Intentions? I don't know, Alex, this might be dating you. I don't know if you were alive when this movie came out, but everybody who's watching who's seen it knows what I'm talking about. I got you off the streets. How can you excuse me of being racist? And he's like, I live in the Upper East Side. So this whole idea of like when people call you out for those unconscious biases, being so just offended by it, that's something that we totally want to disrupt. I hope that wasn't too spicy for the LinkedIn.
Cruel Intentions went out in 1999. So I don't know how old you think I am, but if it's 20, I'll take it.
I mean,
Anyway, okay. Next question. Do you have any recommended sources for diverse canned photos / graphics? So they're probably looking for like a Getty type resource to find diverse imagery.
One that recently came across my desk is called POC Stock, I believe. So give that a quick Google. I'm sure there are many options, but that is one that I've recently become aware of.
Okay, perfect. The question is, how can you increase customer experience with your business? I don't know if it's increase like positive interactions, but it's a little bit of a broad question. But if you have any responses to how you can improve customer experience or increase.
I mean, Maddie, tell me where your mind goes with this, but I think that's an interesting one that sort of speaks to an aspect of the marketing process that we haven't talked about. One of my good friends is a leader in the customer success world, and we're always talking about how that interacts with these principles of inclusive marketing. What does it look like to ensure you're considering the sort of diversity of sort of life experience and lived experience, as we kind of talked about before, and how you interact with your customers, and how can you inclusive that lens in sort of your approach to evaluating how you improve?
So my mind goes in a variety of places, because when I hear the word customer, it means something different at PepsiCo, because our customers are the Krogers, the Walmarts of the world, and our consumers are the people who actually eat the chips. But I'm going to assume that the question came from someone who's thinking about the consumer. I'll give an example of how we've used inclusion in our marketing innovation processes. So on today's talk, we've mainly been talking about inclusion in media, but we should also be thinking about inclusion in our innovation processes as well. So our team in Israel created packaging that was easier to open for people with physical disabilities. Now that package can benefit everybody. So we call this innovation on the fringes. Another colleague of mine at Sustainable Brands, her name is Etienne White, she talked about this cut curb effect. And the story behind this effect is when people with wheelchairs requested there be a ramp created outside of grocery stores, which would make it easier to get in and out. That ramp helps moms with strollers, and now helps anyone who's bringing in or taking out a shopping cart. It's this ability for innovation at the fringes to help everybody. So that's where my mind goes when I think about consumer experience or customer experience.
I love that you took it there, Maddie, because it really brings it full circle. The examples that we looked at in the beginning of this conversation, like Real Tone from Pixel, like True Name, they really are all accomplishing that same objective. And I think you just brought it down to a place where we see how that can have an effect in the consumer packaged goods world about things that we put into our bodies, but also things that we use as technologies. It's not just about, you don't have to be a Google to have an impact in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. Question, who is that wonderful person that came in live to discuss inclusive marketing campaign tips? That was Rakia Reynolds. Hopefully my social team can just drop the link to her LinkedIn profile in the chat as well. Final question, and then we'll need to wrap for the day because we are at time. What are brands doing to educate their marketing teams on DE&I?
I can start with that one. Diversity training, not just one-time training, but quarterly training. And I'm thinking about how do we do this at an even greater cadence, because I don't think diversity trainings should just be something we do once a year. It needs to be practice. It's a muscle we have to build. We are creating diversity councils to look at our creative, to assess our creative. We are bringing in thought leaders. We are working with academic researchers so that we can understand issues. Just bringing in experts, talking to nonprofits, talking to thought leaders. So we're using a variety of different ways to educate our marketers on DEI.
And I'll just add that it's such a broad space. There are so many different aspects of impact when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. But, shameless plug, one piece that I'm really passionate about is teaching marketing teams how to think about the go-to-market approach in terms of the framework we talked about. And I do a workshop called Maximize the Movement that does just that. So that's one of the many ways that folks can learn, and the list that Maddie gave, I think, is super comprehensive as far as all the different aspects that need to be considered and elevated in order for us to make progress.
Great. One other person added to Stocksy is apparently great when it comes to diverse imagery. So Stocksy can be another resource for everyone on the call. And that is all the time. Sorry, what was that?
Oh, I know. I said I look forward to checking that one out too. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. That is all the time we have for today. Thanks so much to our audience for tuning in and being so engaging throughout the broadcast and telling us how much you love Fenty. We hope you learned something today to take back to your team. Don't forget to buy Maddie's book on social impact marketing, and to learn more about what Lola does, visit her website at www.maximizethemovement.com, or you can use the short link that's at the bottom of your screen as well. Both will take you there. And join us for the next Live with Marketers session happening in July. We're actually skipping June. I'm going on summer vacation. I'm not going anywhere, but we're skipping June. And then we'll be back in July where we're going to be talking about identity, privacy, and personalization in a cookieless future. So keep an eye out for that. And of course, thank you to our amazing guests, Lola and Maddie. Thank you so much for being here and taking the time. We really appreciate you.